Martha, if you're talking, you're muted. Good morning.
Hello. Going to wait another minute or two for a few more people to come in.
I think the meeting notes document needs to be updated.
Quite possibly. I have not gotten to that yet. Okay. Let's see. 09, 17. Okay. Do I have any volunteers to be a scribe?
Yeah, I can hop on that.
Thank you. So it is now 5 after. We've got one more person trickling in. Okay. Yay, we get the meeting intro script. Hello, everyone. This is a reminder the meeting is being recorded and will be posted to LFX and YouTube. Your participation in these meetings is an agreement to abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct, and we've already got a scribe. So we should be good to go to the next section. New member intros. Anyone here who would like to introduce themselves? Say a couple of words. If not, that's okay too. But Okay. So we are in our presentation or community demo spot, and I think this is where Justin had suggested that we should do some form of a debate. And Mike Lieberman and myself failed to back out of the way quickly enough, and we will be debating whether the recent supply chain incidents around software package registries, um, the responsibility for mitigating those falls on the end users of the registries, where that work should be assigned. So I don't know if
Is there someone who's a moderator? Did we decide on that?
we did not. That could be you.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'm a moderator then. Okay, so Evan, which perspective are you presenting?
I'm presenting that the perspective that registries should be on the hook for these security failings, and that they should be doing more.
And Mike, I assume you're saying that individual developers should be doing more?
One second here. Yep. Sorry. How do we want to start? How do we usually start this again?
Yeah. Okay. So what happens is that the moderator, which is me, is going to ask. I just was taking a couple notes because once again I haven't prepared, given that I just knew I was going to be moderator 30 seconds ago. So I'll have each of you do an opening statement, and Evan, I'll have you go ahead and go first. You have about a minute and a half or so. If you start to run really, really long, I'll cut you off. If you don't need all your time, that's also fine.
Okay. Just a moment. Let me. I actually put some slides together for this, and let me see if I can get them. Here we go. So my basic point is registries are de facto already on the hook for a lot of this, and they're doing this work. They're taking down malware already, and the economics make sense to do it at the central control point rather than expecting every single developer and enterprise and so forth to have their own tooling to detect when there's a malicious publish of malware packages. So this debate topic was suggested and brought up because a few weeks ago a few NPM developers fell for some phishing email and ended up giving away NPM credentials, which allowed an attacker to republish some very popular packages with new versions with CryptoStealer malware in present. More recently, yesterday, there was another news story about a worm that would attempt to look for your NPM credentials and then republish the top 20 NPM packages that you had access to with a copy of the worm attached as a new version. NPM has, in both cases, taken down the offending versions and helped people republish newer versions to, undo all of this. They've got undo buttons, and they're also responsible for all of the tooling around NPM. So if we want to fix these things, the easiest place to build these defenses is in the registries that are already having to do a lot of this stuff. And we can do it better without needing to spread the burden heavily on all the people feeding into this ecosystem.
Okay, Mike, your opening statement.
Sure. I don't have any slides, but
you took Mike's 2 slides, so I felt like
yeah.
I had to.
Yeah. No, I know.
That's fine.
But so fundamentally, the people who are impacted by this, right, are going to be the users. And the users are the ones who are, they're the only ones who know what their risk appetite is. They're the only ones who know that even like, hey, NPM, they're the only ones who even know that they're using the right package manager, right? So for example, no matter what a package manager does, if somebody's using the wrong package manager, doesn't help, right? So fundamentally, I think that it's up to the users to actually think about what they need to be doing to protect themselves from things like this sort of attack. In addition, like I think the Shai-Hulud worm that Evan you just brought up, the Shai-Hulud worm from just was it yesterday, day before, that kind of came out, is a good example of why that is needed, right? Because this was a self-replicating worm that impacted users who are not doing enough to protect, like, and you by users I also mean other package maintainers, right? It was impacting package maintainers who weren't doing enough to protect their credentials in the right way, which then led this to continue to propagate. And so, yeah, I think at the end of the day, and it's up to the actual users to understand and to make sure that they're only pulling in what they should be. And again, that I don't think that is necessarily an easy thing. I think it is a hard thing, but it is a very much a needed hard thing to do. Yeah.
Okay, Evan, do you have a response to this?
I think telling users that you're holding it wrong and you're not being careful enough works when you have experts, but we've crossed the Rubicon of people being experts on package management a long time ago, and people are just going to show up and do unsafe things. And we need the car manufacturers to have seatbelts, to use an analogy here. And driver education is wonderful, and we should also license people, but it's not clear how we get there. And we do have the ability to tell manufacturers to put better seatbelts into their cars. There's only like 10 of them, so it's much easier to do.
Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah. Again, I think I kind of actually agree with the thing of we should be licensing drivers, right? You know, I think when it comes to saying that folks are going to do silly things is, you know, or risky things, insecure things, is definitely always a that's a persistent risk, regardless of whether or not we're talking package managers or we're talking driving or we're talking recreational activities, right? You know, but that's where I think, again, if I go and don't install a lock on my front door, that to me is not a failure of the house manufacturer, right? Like, it's a failure of me to ensure that a lock was installed. And I think the thing that we're expecting package managers to do is understand everybody's risks. And I think that's just untenable. And compared to allowing individual users to address sort of their own risks, because again, I don't even think at the end of the day, you know, yes, a package manager can pull down a malicious package, but it is harder and harder for them to understand, am I being published a malicious package, right? If you give me your credentials, it's very difficult to say, oh, well, actually, this person didn't intend to do this. And that is why I also, again, I pull in not just end users, as in Mike developer who wants to install a fancy new npm package on his laptop to do some work and whatever. I'm also including stuff like I'm also
Or a CrowdStrike developer.
Yeah, exactly. Like or a package manager, like a company or somebody who maintains a package, right? Because they themselves were impacted here. And it's clear that if they were securing at least to me, if they were securing their GitHub actions, if they were securing their CI/CD in a way that these things wouldn't have leaked, right? This wouldn't have happened.
So one point that I don't think we've touched on enough that I'd like both of you to respond to Evan first, is that a lot of these ecosystems have quite a bit of diversity in terms of thinking of something like the Python ecosystem. There's quite a bit of tooling. There's different registries that are used by different folks. There are different maintainers for different tools and stuff like this. And we haven't really seen a ton of uniformity across ecosystems with what are best practices in what should be done. There's some stuff that is being used in a few places, but I think we're a long way from having you can imagine like that everyone decides that they need something kind of like salsa level whatever, and they all just do it. Or they something like
or
baseline.
They need gradual rollouts.
Right. But I think different ecosystems have very different ideas of what their threats and risk are. And I think this isn't, given there hasn't been a lot of evidence to show this is driven by fact. This is just like we as the developers of X got excited about trying to solve problem Y.
Mm-hmm.
Like how does that color your feeling that it's really the registries that should be doing things, given that they haven't coalesced around like some best practice guidance that they all are following?
I mean, each language ecosystem is somewhat a product of the specific languages that are used, and things that may make sense in Python with short flat names seem really weird in Maven with long namespace names, as just one example. So I think there's room to say, oh, everyone does it exactly this way. But I think there's also, and then NPM is in a weird middle space where some packages are namespaced and some aren't. And that seems like it might be the worst of all worlds, but what do I know? Also, the NPM ecosystem is much deeper in terms of dependency chains than many others. So that may affect some of the other design decisions that go on there in comparison with something like Maven or PyPy. So I think that there's genuine diversity here, but we can still say, hey, here's a best practice. Trusted Publishing, I feel like, has been a good example of standardizing some of that stuff. I would love to see, there's also some standardization around giving feeds of new packages, which these security companies take and analyze, and they all race to find the next malware that's in the supply chains. And I feel like we should leverage some of that to have these security companies who want to publish, look how good we defend things, help take this stuff down and standardize and automate that removal process. That feels like a place where standardization is not as much of a problem.
Mike, your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. So there's two things. One is, and this, I could speak to this from personal experience, is in OpenSSF, I had attempted several years ago to talk to a couple of the maintainers of NPM and talk to them about stuff like the dangers of install scripts. And the answer was, well, there's real use cases behind this. And then I said, well, the majority of those, the majority of attack vectors in npm sort of style hijacking and malicious, malware and all that sort of stuff, it exploits stuff like install scripts, because install scripts run as part of the installation process, right? You're not just copying some files over. You're also running arbitrary code. And a lot of folks would say, what do you like? A lot of folks I think are surprised by that. And I think end users need to be aware of this, right? And they need to know that, hey, this is just the way the world is. And when installing packages, when running these things, if this is the way that the world has to be, then maybe we should sandbox our installations. We should be sandboxing a lot of these things so they can't get out, so that if it turns out it is malicious, right? So that's one part of it. The second part of it, I think, kind of actually agreeing with Evan, is like, hey, stuff like trusted publishing is great, but we need end users to enforce that on themselves, right? Like, and then, until every single person is using trusted publishing, which again, I think I want to reiterate here that, to me at least, package maintainers themselves are themselves users, right? They are installing packages from wherever, and it's like, great, I could have trusted publishing turned on as a maintainer of some npm package, but unless literally that cascades recursively, right, where every single npm package is using trusted publishing, then I'm just the weakest link, because, or rather, not I'm the weakest link, like me ingesting in stuff that doesn't follow trusted publishing because I need this library and it's the only one that does this thing I need. I use trusted publishing, but I'm still potentially pulling in malware. It probably would have protected against this particular sort of like the attack from breaking out of my box, but potentially anybody who's installing my software and recursively is pulling that down is still going to have issues.
And I think in some cases, at least, trusted publishing is an additional way to publish, but you can't turn off my API key can publish.
So I think your positions are coalescing more than is appropriate for debate. I'd like to push you both to once again think more carefully about whether this is something, when an incident like this happens, should we be like looking at the most recent worm incident? Is this something where CrowdStrike is completely blameless? Is this something where NPM is completely blameless? And this position you take does not have to be your personal, extremely firmly held position, but I'd like to hear you each try to take strong positions along the axis you're debating from. Evan, if you want to go first.
Sure. NPM could have prevented that worm, I think, with some changes in the way that they publish packages. If instead of when you publish a package, it immediately goes live, if it went into something like a 24-hour quarantine, where only folks who said, I really want to live on the edge, would see it, then within those 24 hours, the infected package would have been detected and taken down, and it wouldn't propagate further because the registry simply said, hey, I'm going to hold on to this and delay any visibility of this to anyone else until we've got some more assurance that it isn't malware. So I think in this case, there are many ways to potentially fix this, but I think the registries could solidly fix this if they wanted to invest a bit more into, detection, and we were willing to slightly degrade service in that, oh, you can't get the latest update for 24 hours.
So yeah, I think if package managers could fix this, they would have fixed this already. I think the challenge here is, you know, and the area I agree with Evan on is people do silly things. And I think that end users are continuing to do silly things and they are finding ways to work around these controls, right? You know, I would argue that if somebody said, yep, there is that flag for, you know, I'm on the edge, like, yeah, give me stuff that's potentially unsafe, folks are still going to do that. They're going to say, great, I need that latest feature, right? You know, because we're still seeing stuff like best practices call for things like lock files. I've talked to folks who have said, oh, I don't use lock files. We're always on latest. Because we want to be able to pull in whatever's the latest thing there. And that is extraordinarily dangerous. And we should be pushing more on the end users here, right? Your crowd, like to kind of tie it back into the CrowdStrike stuff, right? Hey, CrowdStrike, you know, you can make an argument that like somebody who's running in their browser, hey, they don't know what's being pulled in. But your average developer should know. And then definitely a company like CrowdStrike should know that, hey, I should be doing the right things in my build process in order to not leak credentials, in order to not publish something malicious, right? That to me is, I think, the key bit here, right? We can talk about secure defaults as much as we want. We can sort of say, hey, package managers and other folks should be doing things. But at the end of the day, the users are the ones who are like making those changes. They're the ones who are, you know, have the access to publish the package, right? And stuff like that. So I think, you know, yeah.
So we had a great question here from the Peanut Gallery. I'm going to tee up John. Do you want to unmute and say it? If not, I can relay your question.
Yeah, Mike, I'm just curious, how are we going to get all of our vulnerability scanners down to 0 if we don't just always run latest? We need all these security updates, right?
So I think it's okay to, again, build in, like, I think for an end user, and especially in this day and age, with so many great tools and technologies out there, you can build sandboxed environments. You can build environments that focus on provenance and all that stuff, right? So where you can say, hey, I'm going to run off of latest, but without network access. So it doesn't just immediately try to publish something malicious or doesn't try to leak my credentials, right? So I think that there is a bunch there to say, hey, let's figure this out first. Oh, this is actually not malicious. Cool, I can now update. The other thing too, right, is I think this is also why folks need to understand their own sort of risk appetite and their own risk profile, right? You know, pulling in latest, you know, literally like, oh my gosh, a new update just went out. How do you know that it's actually good, right? You still need to do some due diligence on that. Just because somebody says, hey, we got to fix all the vulnerabilities, hey, that's great. But you also don't want to just be able to pull in something that didn't actually fix the issue in the first place. So you still need to do some level of due diligence. Like somebody might say, hey, Mike, you install this new lock, it doesn't have this issue. It's like, well, great, let me install let me try it out and see, does it have the issue? You know, I feel like users have to have some, like they're just expecting all of this for free. And they have to take on a lot of that responsibility themselves because they're the ones who are impacted, them and their downstream customers or users.
I almost feel like this discussion about when to pull in updates is our next debate topic rather than this debate topic. I'm going to try, I literally think we should consider queuing that one up because I think that would be a fun topic to discuss in the future. But I'm going to try to bring us home and recenter on exactly this. So given diverse ecosystems that have diverse tools that are under the set of control of diverse maintainers, I want to go back to that. Thinking about the Python ecosystem where you have PyPI and you have Conda and you have pip and you have all kinds of other client tools that different people are using, where it's, and this isn't just like one guy who does all of this stuff or one girl who does all of this stuff. It's like a herd of cats all pushing in different directions with different business interests and different ecosystem interests. So, Mike, I'd like you to answer first. How do you think this changes the equation in any way? Is this mean, like, what does this mean for users? Do users need to be careful about their tooling, or how do they react to such a diverse environment?
Yeah. There's no way to claim it's easy, right? That it's not easy, because if it was easy, we wouldn't be having this debate. So it is clearly a difficult problem. And again, I think this is where I would argue that, users here need to understand what are the things they are worried about, right? If, I don't want to I still think, again, to kind of use the analogy about my front door, right? If I'm going to look at locks for my front door and a security system for my front door that makes sense for me and the risks in my neighborhood, the risks that I think I have, or hey, do I have anything worth a ton of money that could be stolen? All of those things. Those are the things that come into the calculus. And I think everybody needs to be making that calculus as well, because it's going to look different than, you putting a lock on the vault of a bank, right? Both are still the responsibility of, like, one is my personal responsibility, right? The other one is the responsibility of the bank in understanding its customers' risks and those sorts of things. And I think that's where we need to kind of focus on, because again, if we take it back to sort of now thinking about it in terms of like tech, right? I might look at this a little differently for things like my personal website, where I might be like, yeah, I'm going to do some basic, I'm going to use some basic security tools to make sure I'm not downloading anything malicious, but I'm not going to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in security SaaSes and consulting in order to do that. But if I'm, working at a bank, yeah, I would do that because I want to be able to protect my customers and folks who are using this sort of stuff. And then I'll kind of finish it up with saying, I think a thing that a lot of folks are doing, which is dangerous, is they're combining all of those things into one space, right? My workstation, right? My developer workstation is where I do my personal website and top secret work and all this sort of stuff. And I think a lot of users are doing that, and they sort of view it all in one kind of in one lens, like, oh, I run Dependabot, I run some security stuff on my laptop, or I run some security stuff in my GitHub action, and that's it. And they don't look at the areas that are super critical, like the build, especially like the publishing action, right? And I will say, I used to work at a hedge fund where this sort of thing we did, right? We would go in, and the build process was heavily scrutinized. You were updating the documentation, it was still scrutinized, but not to the same extent.
Great. Evan, would you like to respond?
Yeah. So to Mike's point as well, in several of the environments that I've been in, they've said, hey, registries are great. And the way we're going to secure our dependencies is we're going to run our own registry. We're going to buy something like Artifactory, and we're going to use that as the central point to unify all the different people who come in with different ways of publishing packages and so forth. If it's not in the package registry and it hasn't gone through the scrutiny that the package registry provides, you can't use that package until it has. And I think that's kind of an argument that says, hey, the right place to be applying this scrutiny is the package registry. And maybe if it turns out that the default level of scrutiny from, NPM or Maven or something like that is too onerous, people will figure out, how to set up Wild West Maven or Wild West NPM. But today, your only option is to either spend a whole ton of money on something like Artifactory and running it yourself, or to pick Wild West NPM. And Wild West NPM is probably not the place that most of us want to live on a day-to-day basis if we were given a choice. But we're not given a choice right now. And so the registry should do better.
Okay, so I'll make one last point, and then you should all be thinking about closing things. So as someone who's tried over time to work with some of the registries to improve their security, this has been moderately painful process for them. In some cases, we also worked to try to help end users, and both were complicated situations. So I understand, I'm sympathetic to things from both their side, like, the registry side of, hey, basically, are you just going to dive bomb in, throw us something that we have to figure out and maintain and do stuff with and then run away? I'm sympathetic to that viewpoint. And I'm also somewhat sympathetic to the user viewpoint of, like, do I have to learn yet another thing? I just want to do my damn work. So Evan, it feels like you feel like the registry should be more active in terms of employing the latest and greatest security controls. What advice would you give them, or how would you support their efforts to do this, considering there are folks trying to work with them to improve their security?
So this may not be easy given their current architecture, but I thought about this a little bit, and I think that progressive visibility would go a long way in making it possible to detect things before they get out into the wild. And so there's a bunch of these folks, like Aikido Security found some of these. There's Socket and a bunch of others doing this, and they might have a special API key that lets them get at the artifacts that have been uploaded before they're visible to any actual tool chain. They'd have a special API key that says, yes, I'm grabbing the unsafe stuff because I know what I'm doing. And then, if they haven't said anything in 6 hours, then you say, okay, if you're an early adopter, if you run it with an early adopter flag, or you ask for that specific version or something like that, then you can see it. But if you just in general say, give me this dependency, you get something that's more than 6 hours old, or more than 24 hours old. And then, if early moves that window up a little bit, but there's still an opportunity for the scanners to get in there first and flag stuff, because they're finding things pretty fast.
Okay.
So that would be what I would say. But I realize a lot of these folks are right now serving not quite straight from object storage, but pretty close. And so the actual implementation might be tricky. Something like Cloudflare Workers potentially could help.
Okay. And Mike, I'd like to pivot the question to you a bit and say, given that there's a lot of tooling out there that users may hear different things about that could improve, but is sort of not the standard thing that's built in, how would you advise users to find and secure more effective tooling? I know you yourself have actually built some quite nice tooling that helps in some of this regard. But the example I'm thinking of, the Sterling, what was the? What's the name of it? The Rust
Security
thing. The basic setup for a Rust project.
Scooters. Is that
Yeah, Scooters. But like Scooters is, I think, a great idea, but one that hasn't turned into like a widely used thing. For those who don't know it, and Mike should really be the one explaining this, but it basically lays out like a secure foundational setup of a bunch of tools that you'd need for a Rust ecosystem set up in a certain way. And so, users could have beaten a path to your door now that you built a better mousetrap. Is that their responsibility to do it? How would you try to get controls better in the hands of users?
Yeah. So I think, to reiterate, I think at the end of the day, the end users have to be the ones to, the users have to be the ones to use those tools. And I think this is, again, where some of this challenge comes in, which is like, the challenge is, a lot of folks are coming in and just not using the tools at their disposal. Like, even where there are controls that are like, a combination of NPM and some, like as an NPM, the CLI tool and the package manager, they're often not using the security tools that are available to them in the first place, which is, I think, the thing that you need to kind of push on users is, yeah, that has to happen. Because and then in addition to that, I think there's all sorts of great tools, open source vendor, ones, because hey, there's lots of vendors who did a lot of research on this Shai-Hulud worm and a lot of the other stuff. So there are those tools out there. Again, security is not completely free, right? Whether it's volunteer time in open source or vendor time and it costs you some money, whatever it may be, it does cost, it does have a cost associated with it. And I think the thing is that from a tooling perspective is there's two bits. One is, or actually a couple bits. One is education, right? I think that like users need to understand that they're the ones being harmed here. That they're the ones who are, you don't want somebody to steal your stuff, have that lock, right? Because, hey, there are bad people out there who are going to try to do bad things. And we need to make sure that we're doing, enough stuff to protect ourselves in a reasonable way, right? And I say that recognizing that, like, it's going to be very different if you're talking about, like, a state actor who is very determined to attack you specifically. That's going to be very different, but I'm talking more about generic stuff like this NPM supply chain attack, where it's like, yeah, if folks were not using install scripts, this would have prevented it. If they were using more tooling, like there was actually some malware detection tools that would have caught this. They would have caught the obfuscated stuff that was there and would have caught it as it was happening. But folks are not running that. And some of these tools are open source. They're free, and people are not using it. And I think the reason being is part of it is an education problem. And part of it is hey, I have enough things on my plate. It's not really a big worry for me. So I think the things that we should be doing as a community is pushing users to become better educated while also making tools like, for example, scooters or something like that, so simple, so trivial to use that there's no reason not to use that, so that you are verifying those things and whatnot.
Great. Okay.
I was
So
going to say for Python, UV has been doing some nice work there.
great. Okay. So 30-second closing statements from each of you. Evan, go first.
I think that,
Time's up. No.
okay. I think that some of the tooling arguments again come back to, okay, we have these few central points. There may be multiple tools that work with the package manager, but at the end of the day, they all call up to the same package manager. And that's a place where we can, focus our efforts. And I think our payoffs will be better than trying to teach 50,000 developers to care about supply chain security.
Mike?
Yeah. I think if package managers could have solved this problem, they would have solved this problem already. I think fundamentally it's in, if somebody wants to drive off the road, they will drive off the road. And I think users need to recognize that they have everything today to make sure things like this don't continue to happen. And they're continuing to ignore them. They're continuing to not use them. And I think the incentives are there actually in the industry, especially around insurance, which is starting to threaten users saying, hey, if you don't do secure things, if you don't use that secure flag and you and you make a claim, we're not going to go and process that claim. We'll deny it. And I think that's the right way of going about it and getting users, to focus on what is actually important and how to protect themselves and then protect also their downstream users and consumers and customers.
Great. Well, thank you both for this wonderful debate. Everybody, round of applause. Great. And that concludes the debate portion of this. If you have suggestions for other debate topics and things like this, please place them in the Slack channel for the TAG Security and Compliance Group. I will now hand the meeting back over to our facilitator, Evan.
I get to talk a lot in this meeting. Oh well. So I already added your suggestion about when to pick up updates to the future schedule. So review of other time zones and Tag SC meetings. There was last week in APAC meeting, which looks like there was a notebook LM shared, which I did not look into. And some looks like the IAM white paper hasn't gotten a lot of additional feedback, so may be getting close to being published. If you have opinions about what CNCF should be saying about IAM, you're probably on borrowed time for getting that feedback in before the current version is published. And TOC meeting updates. Who made it to the TOC meeting yesterday? I did not. It was a terrible time for me.
I believe myself. I think John was there as well. I think trying to think back through any updates that were specific to the tags. I'm drawing a blank at the moment of anything that would impact us or that we should be discussing.
It looks like the charter is up for a vote. Well, either John has nothing to say or there was nothing, that happened. So, okay. Project updates. Supply chain. I'm assuming this might be the supply chain insights, which I do have a slight update for. Matt Young was able to build a tool to scrape artifacts out of GitHub releases for the graduated projects and attempting to use that to determine if they have things like SBOMs or in Toto signatures or attestations or SigStore signatures. And he'd finished it the day before and it was not working entirely correctly. So he's going back and getting, some more stuff, but the initial numbers didn't really make sense. So we're going to look again and see if we can get better numbers. He also got a K3D setup, I think, for running Guac and the other components that he wants. He switched that to Docker Compose, actually. Because some of his components did not have Helm charts that he could use. And that's about it. We're checking in a README with the status and things like that, and establishing a project board. Okay. Security assessments. Is that still all in the project's court?
As far as I'm aware.
Okay.
If not, then please let me know. I believe I'm getting tagged on these issues, but I'm not as certain of it as I was when we were in a separate repo and so on.
Yes. Compliance. Jen, I saw that you had something.
I did, and I have a document too. I can add the link to of some notes that Brant and I took. But essentially to kind of recap a couple ideas that we had, and Brant, feel free to just kind of jump in if I say anything that sounds wrong. But we were thinking that one of the next steps, maybe initially, that we could do is to concretely define what is automated governance in the TAG security lexicon, more specifically around like where does it overlap with concepts like compliance as code and policy as code. So possibly starting there, and then the next thing we thought we might do is start with just an initiative, possibly like the secure supply chain insights. I wonder if it would be useful to start with an initiative and then determine if we should be a sub project from the results of that initiative, determining if we have a longer maintenance tail than something that we might just like cut a release of and then kind of crystallize. And so there was two possibilities we thought that could be taken. One is content-based, mainly looking at the Cloud Native Security Catalog, specifically assessing the overlap it has with the OSPF baseline, determining a value proposition and what format it should be represented in. Right now, I think it's in a spreadsheet, and it might be more useful for it to be in something like YAML, so people can easily just update it with a PR. And then the other one was possibly a reference architecture white paper. So taking something like that security catalog and understanding how to put it into practice in a cloud native environment, what components we might need, and then maybe like concrete examples of projects that would fulfill those components. So yeah, that was I think a main recap of the discussion. I don't know, Brant, if you had something to add there.
No, I think you nailed it.
So I took a quick look, and it didn't look like we had a lot of current issues that we needed to discuss, which is good because we have maybe 7 minutes left. Are there any other check-ins or updates that people wanted to share?
I kind of have like a topic stewing in the back of my head. I was going to throw it out to the channel, but I am curious if there exists guidance on GitHub organizations and their like and auditing access. See a lot of enterprise guidance when I look around, and that's great. But I'm thinking from the perspective of like how many GitHub organizations are there for CNCF projects alone, and what are their like access structures that they would recommend for an open source project, right? If we think about kind of like, initially a single maintainer project that happens to evolve, like how do you onboard reviewers and triagers? How do you onboard new maintainers? How do you include them in their organization? And I'm really curious if like this guidance doesn't already exist, because if it does, wonderful. If it does not, I'm kind of like, I don't know, a little concerned about how many GitHub organizations there might be just like with overprivileged access.
And overprivileged access is funny because you need write access to the repo if you want to be able to manage issues. Which many people might think, oh, that's an onboard step before you get commit access, but GitHub doesn't quite see it that way. But then you can use code owners to kind of claw it back. I don't remember. I was running into this at one point, and maybe the triage role hadn't been introduced at that point, but it feels like it's not as easy as it should be.
Yeah, just trying to think through like the delta between orgs themselves and then also repositories and like the different ways with which things can get mixed up. You add the layer of teams. Teams can be given like broader organizational privileges. And so there's like a big mix in here. I think enterprise strategies probably covers some of the things, but enterprise also like lacks the nuance of open source. And so like there's things I think if we're interested there. And then the one additional layer that stands out to me is the security manager role. And that might be again in more of a GitHub-ism as opposed to maybe Git across the board and every other platform. But we've asked in the past during presentations from projects when we're given our recommendation of like, do you have somebody who is like your security contact? And I think that's a great question. It kind of surfaces, hey, so-and-so helps us with, you know, bringing kind of a security perspective and mindset to this project. Or no, we don't have anybody who really spends time thinking about the project. We just build capabilities. And that's fine. I think that's kind of the reality. But there exists this security manager role. And I'm really curious, given the permissions that I saw that it gives you access to things like for managing security, like the different things, I would say. I haven't fully delved into it, but I saw the list and I was like, is this something that we should be promoting? Like, not only should you have somebody who thinks about security regularly, but also somebody who, you know, is advocating to be in that role in an official capacity. I think it'd be fun to explore. I don't know, like, again, if there's nothing out there, like what does the CNCF see as the responsibility more broadly, and like, should the TOC have some opinions as well?
I think that's an interesting topic. We now have 2 minutes left, so
Let's do on that one more. I'd love to bring it back up at another discussion.
So I don't think we have anything currently on the schedule for next week's presentation. Do we have any nominations or, oh, we'd like to go look at this or that? It looks like Confidential Containers did a update a while ago and they're currently in an incubating capacity. I don't know if we'd want to invite them back or if that feels like we'd be piling on them too much.
We usually get silence during this time, and so like I think that that's perfectly fine. I think maybe we could do a better job at trying to throw this out in our Slack channels and see if we can get any more responses there versus what we do here.
Okay. Well, we are at 11, so that's going to have to be what happens anyway. See you all next week. Well, not Mike. You're going to be go hitting some users or something. He's gone anyway. Oh well. It was fun to do the debate.